some more students coming, but maybe a little bit of a straggler or two. We're very excited that Jay Vadiveloo was able to join us from the East Coast. He made the harrowing trip here today. We were a little worried about you, but I think Connecticut didn't get the biggest part of the storm.
That's right.
This is the second in our fall MCFAM Distinguished Lecture Series, and we're very privileged to have Jay here with us. He's got an incredibly unique position. He's both a senior consulting actuary at Towers Watson and a faculty professor at the University of Connecticut, as well as the director of a very innovative Actuarial Research Center. And he's going to talk to you about some of the things he's doing today, so I'm not going to say anything about that. I am going to tell you a little bit more about his, very prestigious background. He has a doctorate in statistics from the University of California, Berkeley, a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, a member of the American Academy of Actuaries, and a chartered financial analyst. He's got 25 years of experience with life insurance, senior level appointments at Connecticut Mutual, Mass Mutual, Aetna, ING, Deloitte, Watson Wyatt, and Towers Watson. So he's a role model for all of us. One of the important contributions to the financial services industry that he's contributed is a new algorithm for risk modeling, and he's got a patent pending on it, and I think he's going to tell you maybe a little bit more about that. So I think let's give a round of applause and welcome to Jay. We're very fortunate to have him here today.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is it okay? It's I said it's a real pleasure and quite an honor to be invited. What do you call the Distinguished Lecture Series? I just hope I can live up to the expectations of all the previous speakers. But I don't think any of you know the story of how all this happened. So let me mention that a bit. It all happened in the Winnipeg terminal. We're all coming back after the Actuarial Research Conference. I was heading back to Hartford via Minneapolis, and Laurie and Rena were going obviously to Minneapolis. Our flight was delayed. So we're sitting there in the terminal and just chatting. I was telling them what I do, and they were telling what they do. And of course, when we all left, Laurie said, I'll get in touch with you. And I just sort of didn't give much credence to what she said. It was just idle airport chatter.
Not with Laurie.
No.
Exactly. I'm learning. So I come back, and 3 weeks later, I get this invitation. And I'm very, very glad, she's invited me, because I think there's a lot I can share with you about the work we're doing at the Goldenson Center. That's the research center I manage. And I think I've never, ever made a presentation like this before, where I'm exclusively talking about the center. I've talked about the separate topics that I'll be discussing, but never overall the center. So it was even interesting to put it together. The one thing I'm hoping, I know there's Gary over here in industry. Is anyone else from industry?
Chris Gross.
Oh, Chris, sorry, I didn't realize it. I have your faculty too. If there was a takeaway, I'd hope that you all get out of this presentation, and both from industry and from students in academia, is that a collaborative research effort between industry and, say, a top university like the University of Minnesota can benefit all parties involved if it's done properly. And maybe what I'll be sharing with you is how you can do it properly. And you can't get the same results if it's done just by industry alone, or if it's done just by academia alone. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll be convinced of what I just said. This is what I'm planning to cover. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the Goldenson Center. That's the work I do. I manage the center, and I'll talk about my role as director of the center. And that invariably raises the question, how does Towers Watson come into the whole picture? And I'll talk about that. And then I'm going to spend a bit of time discussing what I would say is our research philosophy at the center. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why we are such a the center has such a strong relationship with industries, partly because of the philosophy we uphold. Then I'm going to just talk about 3 initiatives at a very high level. Each one of them, has been full presentations. the RSS technique, or replicated stratified sampling technique, and actually we have the patent now. So
congratulations.
This year it happened. This other initiative which I call it ERM for small businesses, and that's something also fairly new. And then this last one, it's called the National Retirement Satisfaction Index. Now these are not the only projects we do, but I think these are good projects to showcase because they really show what value of collaboration can achieve. I'll conclude. Feel free to interrupt me or ask questions throughout the presentation. It's very non-technical, so it's very easy to ask questions. Okay, a little bit about the Goldenson Center. It was established officially in 2009. We got a gift, an endowment of $1 million from the Goldenson family. In fact, it's the Janet and Mark L. Goldenson Center for Actuarial Research. That's the full name. We just call it the Goldenson Center. It's very important to understand the mission statement of the center. It's black and white, and we try to uphold this mission statement. It's to do applied research projects, but not just any old applied research projects. It's applied research projects to serve the needs of industry. So it's a very different mission statement from the actuarial department or the math department. This is the center. So our entire mission is to do things to serve the needs of industry, and part of my job is to make sure that that happens. I'm very fortunate. I have a budget. That's the income from the endowment. It's for me to use any way I think fit. Jim Bridgman, whom some of you might know, he signs off on any expenditures, just to keep me honest. I need that. But more importantly, to make sure we follow the mission of the center, we have a very active advisory board. We have representatives from the university, of course, but we have key representatives from all the major insurance companies in the region. It's a very dynamic advisory board. Once a year we have an annual meeting. We had ours about a month ago. So, and they are the ones who constantly give me ideas, and I'm constantly testing ideas with them. Okay, so let me describe my role as director. As Laurie mentioned, I am a faculty member in actuarial science. I am a state employee because University of Connecticut is a state university. My job, within the university, I have sort of two kinds of jobs. One is to manage the center, which is, I would say, maybe my main job, but I also have an academic responsibility. I teach a class in actuarial mathematics. Fortunately, only one class. I do supervise a lot of PhD students, partly because a lot of the applied research projects I do through the center lend themselves very nicely to PhD research. We don't have a PhD in actuarial science. You can get a PhD in mathematics with a concentration in actuarial science. The painful thing is you have to pass the math qualifying exams before you can do your PhD in actuarial science. Okay, and the part that is unusual is I'm also a full-time consultant, a senior consultant for Towers Watson. So how does it all work out? So why is Towers Watson doing this? Well, I'm glad they're doing this. Mm-hmm. They do something very, very important. They fund my professorship at UConn. They pay my salary as director. Well, that has an immediate benefit. It means the money from the endowment, I can use it totally to fund research projects. It's not a lot of money, but you don't pay students a lot of money either for research projects. So it goes a long ways. And it allows me to do a lot of exploratory work before I see its commercial value. So there's the direct monetary value in the sense that they pay my salary at the university. It comes as a gift to the university, and they turn around and pay my salary. So it's all in the up and up, okay? Nothing illegal about it. But there's something else Towers Watson does, which I would say is possibly even harder than writing the check. They give me the time. See, as a senior consultant, for any one of you who has spent any time as a consultant, or if you ever come to work in Towers Watson, it's very cut and dry. It's billable hours and sales revenue. And that's how you're judged. Well, obviously, given my responsibilities, I can't do that. So they make a special exception for me. So all the time I spent, coming up with ideas, doesn't generate revenue right away, it's okay with them so far.
I have a question. I've heard that that's generally the culture of Towers Watson, that they're very supportive of employees and trying to keep the best employees and satisfy their...
That's correct, but I would say it's interesting, a little bit of gossip here. It was Towers parent
Yes.
and Watson Wyatt then merged, right?
Right.
I would say this is more the culture of Watson Wyatt.
Which is where you came from.
I came from there. But the most important thing is the current CEO of Towers Watson was the former CEO of Watson Wyatt. So it's a Watson Wyatt culture. I wouldn't say it dominates because we have both parties there, but at least that is still being supported. Towers parent was different. It was, I think, a little bit more cut and dry in terms of checklist kind of an approach. So they pay my salary as director. I mentioned that. They give me the time to perform my duties as director. And so I have access, all the research money I have, I can just use it to support students and professors. They do more than that too. They also sometimes provide projects. Again, because I work for Towers Watson, they provide projects for us to work on for the students. So students, like for example, we had a batch of students who were learning the Moses software, which is the software that Towers Watson markets. And the Moses license was given freely to Towers Watson, to UConn. So the students had a chance to work and learn this software. Many times when I get projects, I'm aware my Towers Watson had to get a project, but when I do the project, I'll use students to do the project. And in things like that, Towers Watson will do sort of the project management work, because I can't manage all the projects that I generate. So that's another useful thing they do. But I think possibly this joint role, I think, maybe one intangible benefit is that it gives credibility to the work we do because, of my joint position, being in industry and in academia. And so when I talk to companies, it makes it a little bit easier when I talk about work to serve the needs of industry. So this joint role is almost a manifestation that, I'm gearing towards doing stuff that helps industry. But there's always a constant balancing act. And I have to say that it comes just from experience to make sure there's no conflict of interest. It happens, there are many stories where you have to sort of be careful. And I follow a very simple rule. The center belongs to the University of Connecticut. It's not part of Towers Watson. They pay my salary, but the center is a university entity. So I cannot put rules like, if we do some research project, we can't publish it. So far, we've never had any conflicts. And they always say, I report directly as director to the dean. And the dean, he's very academic and he always is checking on me to make sure I'm not doing, like when I have a board meeting, I use the Towers Watson logo because that's the logo. I could get my typist, my secretary to do it. And he was upset because he said, no, you can't have a Towers Watson logo for a board meeting because it is the center board and the center is University of Connecticut. So we don't do that anymore. So it's a constant balancing act, but so far I've been able to do that, I think, quite successfully. Okay, so now let me get into what I think is very, very important is our research philosophy. Remember, there's the center, which says the philosophy is to do applied research to serve the needs of industry. So that's the center's philosophy. So how does it translate, in terms of detail? So obviously, we focus on applied research projects. So what do you mean when you say serves the need of industry? The projects are not dreamed about sitting at the university in terms of, what can we do to help industry. The projects come from industry. Now, obviously, my role as Towers Watson, I'm very familiar with what I think are needs in industry, or it comes directly from the advisory board. And you'll see in one of the projects I'm describing, the ideas came from industry. But the key thing is that these projects, in some ways, I would say I have almost like a consultant hat when I do these research projects, meaning that at the end of the project, it can be almost immediately applied in industry. So it's not like, well, you've come up with an idea, to apply it to something real, it takes several more iterations. All those iterations are completed in the projects we do. So it almost has a direct, immediate application. Some of these projects have commercial potential, that's even better. And finally, this is not a requirement, but it's nice if there's some theoretical academic underpinnings behind these projects. It doesn't always happen, but it happens in some situations. So we try to stay honest to this philosophy. And I said, and that's why I think it's such a dynamic and a productive relationship that we have with industry. So, any questions? Okay. So now let me get on to. Okay, so this, if there was one landmark research project that I would say epitomizes everything the center sort of stands for, that's this replicated stratified sampling, or RSS. Why I think it is such a great project is, well, it took a long time to do it. I mean, I think we've almost 3 years, and I can tell you no consulting firm, no company is going to invest 3 years to come up with anything. Well, I could do that because I was sitting in the university and I was exploring a lot of the work, and I was given that freedom to do it. So it was a long time in the makings. We could test this idea many times over before we went out publicly with it. And I always tell people, you know, a lot of us have great ideas, but how many of us have the time to actually explore these ideas fully? Well, I had the time, but it was a great idea in any case. What is it? It's a smart modeling technique. Gary, you know about it. It speeds up processing time, and I would imagine that, you know, for insurance companies, that's probably the single-handedly the biggest problem they are facing, because all the modeling is extremely complicated, and despite all the heavy grid processing and supercomputers and everything, it takes a long time to churn out results. And of course, if you work for a company, to do just a baseline run, let's say it takes you a day, but what if you are in management and you want 40, 50 different sensitivities? No one can wait for 50 days to get results. So this is what we call a smart modeling technique. That means it speeds up processing time and delivers accurate results. Now, it's not the only smart modeling technique in town, but it's got some unbelievable qualities, because the idea came from statistics, and that's sort of my PhD is in statistics. But the idea came from statistics. It uses something very fundamental, which is sampling. It's been around for hundreds of years. It's stratified sampling. It's just a form of sampling. But where it differs from just drawing a sample and making a decision, you couldn't have got a patent on that. We replicate the process. That means we repeat the samples. Something that statisticians can't easily do other than through bootstrapping. Because imagine if you're a statistician and you're trying to do some research work and you're drawing a sample. Well, it takes a lot of work and effort to draw a sample, whether it's a polling sample or you're trying to test a drug. How can you do that over and over again 100 times? You can't. So replicating samples is just not practical outside financial modeling. But in the world of financial modeling, what's our population? It's a database. It's our in-force population. It's a nice CSV file. So if I want to draw a sample, very easy. I want to draw another sample, very easy. So you can draw repeated samples very easily because it's financial modeling. So it's just putting these two things together. So it's new in the world of statistics, may not be practical in the world of statistics, certainly new in the world of financial modeling. So it started off as an idea, and then we started seeing all these wonderful attributes. It works, and it works not because I say so, it works because statistics works, sampling works. And it's really law of large numbers, central limit theorem, just done over and over again. Very simple to understand, and hopefully you can gather from what I've telling you so far. And it's of course very strong, very accurate, and it's academically sound, which is very important when you are doing financial modeling and basing decisions. You want to make sure it's got some academic rigor. You know, like in statistics, when you study, you say, no, you can choose the sample size to develop a certain level of accuracy. Same thing here. You can fix the level of accuracy by either changing your sample size or the number of repeated samples. So you can control your error rate. Another very valuable attribute. For many companies, this third advantage is very, very important because companies invest a lot in actuarial software. If you come up with a new technique, but they have to tinker with their actuarial software, that's expensive and not practical. Well, this sits outside your actuarial software. you feed in the samples, or you get the samples, which is outside, feed it into your system, you don't touch it, and the output, you put it together and come up with the estimate. Very little ongoing maintenance, another practical attribute, because there are many techniques out there where they call it a calibration process, where you have to set things up like replicating portfolios. It's a classic example. You have to do some calibration, and it works initially, and then 3-4 months later you have to recalibrate. So that's painful. Here there's no calibration because every time you draw the samples, you draw it from your current in-force. So as your in-force changes, your samples change. So it's got some very natural attributes, which, as I said, when I first started it, I didn't realize it, but of course, as we developed it, we found all these wonderful things. This is sort of a page from a presentation I normally do. It's a nice schematic. You have the underlying population, which is your in-force. You have these, what do you call it, risk classes or strata, I think. And this is also done in a very simple way. We don't. There's a term they use in actuarial modeling called grouping, if you've heard it. That's a very clever way in which you break up the population into homogeneous groups. No, this is not that at all. We do, in fact, as simple a stratification as possible. Maybe we break up the in-force by face amount or by fund value. We try not to introduce any kind of bias in our stratification process. Then you draw a sample, from each of these risk classes. That's your first sample. Put it back, draw the second sample, and you draw, say, K samples. The way you actually do this in practice, you feed it all into what you call a batch file. And now, for each sample, you run the base run and all the sensitivities of interest, and all of that gets into what we call an RSS processor. You combine the results, and you come up with estimates. It's I said, very, very straightforward, and the students have been doing a lot of this work. So the model, the front end and the back end software you have to develop is also very straightforward. But back to why I sort of look at this as like the flagship research project for the center. If you look at this RSS technique, it satisfies all the criteria I mentioned for our research philosophy. All of them are satisfied. But even more, it's got all kinds of publicity, and we got the 2 patents in this year, in March 2012. So from Towers Watson, they're now marketing it to companies all over the world. So that's certainly from a commercial point of view. It's got theoretical underpinnings. It supports 2 PhD students right now who are doing a lot of the theoretical work. So it's nice, theoretical. I've spoken in statistics conferences as well as actual conferences. And on a personal side, there was this unbelievable article that came out in the New York Times, the Sunday New York Times. Patents aren't for engineers, and my face was out there. And so I became quite well known because of that. We got some innovation award from Risk and Insurance magazine. So we've got a lot of publicity. So I think this technique can probably change how financial modeling will be done in the future for the profession. Now, it couldn't have happened in Towers Watson alone. It couldn't have happened just from the Goldenson Center, because I may have developed the idea, but to apply to all insurance kinds of applications, I had to use Towers Watson to help me. And of course, Towers Watson funded the patent process. So I don't think it's easy to come with something as good as this, but there's hope with this next project. It's this National Retirement Satisfaction Index, very different, and you'll notice from the 3 projects I might be talking about, each one is just, they're not connected, and that's fine. So how did this idea come about? It came actually from 2 advisory board members. I always have, my students present things at a board meeting. So, certainly the advisory board members are very aware that, we do creative things at the Goldenson Center. So the chief marketing officer of a major insurance company, well, he came up to me and said, hey, Jay, I think you guys are capable of doing this. And so he gave this huge problem in front of me. He said, well, most insurance companies are very active in the retirement marketplace. They're developing products to sell in the retirement marketplace. But retirement indexes are all based on economic statistics. The Boston Index, College Index, is a very famous index, and they're great. I mean, they're very rigorous and everything, but they're all based on economic statistics. And as you might imagine, when economic times are good, you know, they give a pretty negative picture. So you're sitting here as a company and you're trying to market your retirement products, and there's this doom and gloom kind of thing that's coming up from these indexes. So basically they approached me not to kind of fix the numbers, but they said, don't you think you know it's better to have a more holistic kind of an approach to coming up with an index and capture non-financial factors as well? For example, your state of health. That's a simple example that someone who retires healthy, all things being equal, is going to have a more satisfying retiree life than someone whose state of health is bad. So how come that's not brought in a retirement index? Of course, it's not. You know, I mean, we call it adaptability. Adaptability is a combination of your level of education and your marketable skills. So just imagine if you retire and you don't have enough assets, but you're highly educated and you're highly marketable, have marketable skills, you can generate post-retirement income if your health is decent. Not everyone has that capability, but that is a factor to the level of education or skill set. Level of job satisfaction. I tell my wife that I don't ever plan to retire because I love my job. But again, if you love your job, you're more willing to work longer and have a healthy working life versus someone who hates their job and is miserable. They might be the ones who want to retire early. Because, you know, I mean, again, if you're unhappy at work, you can have health ramifications. Level of job satisfaction to capture that as well. And finally, retirement planning. I mean, there have been studies which have shown that if you do retirement planning either at or before retirement, you can have a more secure retirement life. Well, all these are great factors to consider, but how do you do it? So, you know, so that is the challenge, but I love challenges like this. So I told the two companies, fine, we'll look at it. So what have we done? We've got 5 professors, Jim Bridgman is one of them, 5 professors, 5 graduate students, and a whole team from Towers Watson, because we have a big retirement, I think it's called the Center for Research and Innovation. They do a lot of retirement benefits work. And the hard thing is that this is not like I mean, at the end of the day, even though these are non-financial factors, we do want to quantify them. So we're not doing something vague like happiness and things like that, or subjective. So yet it's very subjective. So the real challenge is how do you take something which is not naturally quantifiable, and how do you quantify it with some rigor. So we have fascinating meetings, and I think we've got some pretty good. We've got pretty much a good direction, but it's not that easy. It's a real challenging thing, but we are going to develop this index. It's going to be a Goldenson Center Towers Watson index that we're going to publish. It's going to be available to the public. We're not charging for it. It's going to be updated annually. It's very prestigious for the center because we have developed something that is valuable. And of course, from Towers Watson's point of view, they see a ton of marketing potential. If they capture all these factors, you can think of all the sort of the rich analysis you do when you bring in all these non-financial factors and financial factors. So, you know, it's a great project, very interesting, very challenging. And I said, if we do a good job, this could possibly have as much attention and publicity as the RSS project. So, any questions? We haven't done it yet, by the way, it's in progress. But okay, so just a little point here, okay? This is very important. So again, the idea came from industry. We've got people like Towers Watson, which have industry view in mind, professors and students and myself. But what we have done is in the process, we haven't completed it, in the process of developing it, we are bringing back the 2 companies that wanted us to do it and getting their advice as to where we're doing, what direction we're going. So it's very important, again, ultimately to serve the needs of industry, that you have to get industry input, not necessarily at the beginning and at the very end, but continuously. And they love it because the more practical this project we make it, the better for them. So that's just a point I wanted to mention. Now, this last one, and now this is very near and dear to me. I mean, I think it was almost came about from purely altruistic motives versus all the other ones, okay? I wasn't even thinking when I came up with this project in terms of how do you make money out of it, or how do you make Towers Watson happy. I looked at it from one very simple point of view. Risk management is the buzzword of today. Everyone talks about it, especially with the financial crisis. But if you look at, we call it enterprise risk management, when you look at the whole field of enterprise risk management, it's always focused on large companies. So, you know, large companies have a chief risk officer, insurance companies, so other non-insurance companies. All the books you read on ERM all focus on large corporations. But there's an entire business sector, and I call them small businesses. And if you look at the small business characteristics, they're the largest, fastest growing, and the most important business sector of the US economy, and in fact, I would say of any economy in the world. Small businesses also experience the highest failure rates compared to large corporations. Yet, you don't see anyone talking about ERM for small businesses. Well, there's one obvious reason: small businesses are not going to pay for it. So if no one is going to give you money, who's going to do it? Except the Goldenson Center, because we don't need money. We have money to spend. So we do it free of charge. That's how it started, free of charge to small businesses in the region. And I had my students working in teams, and I had no idea it was going to develop the way it developed. So I would say it's probably one of the most successful of the initiatives. It started off with totally altruistic motives. I said students working teams, they love working on this project. You said you do it too, right? I don't know.
We tried one project this summer.
Okay.
First, one bike shop, used bike shop.
Wow.
Interesting.
In conjunction with Jay?
I learned from Jay. Jay also wrote an article on contingents.
Yes, yes, Contingencies magazine.
So based on that, we actually tried to recruit some risk managers from industry to help us guide. We only have undergraduate students, lower level at that. But we couldn't recruit anybody, so I teamed with a faculty member in entrepreneurship department.
Yes.
She was like New York then?
Well, he's too busy for.
He's too busy.
So the 5 students, 3 actuarial students and 2 entrepreneurship majors worked together.
But this was an initiative from St. Thomas, based on what you learned from Jay?
Yeah, based on what we learned from him. So it was a pilot.
Yeah, well, honestly, I said, we started this 3 years ago, and I made my blunders. The one big blunder I first made was I had one student work on a project, and that's a big mistake. Get them to work in teams, because they help each other. But then once I figured out the way to do it, man, it was just unbelievable in terms of the students love it. And of course, my style, that's your style, but I let the students do everything. They are the ones who select the business. They send the letter, of course, with my sort of sign-off behind it. They speak to the small business owners, they interview, they make visits to the client side, they do the final report, they do the presentations, and then I will also give a lot of publicity to my students. I get them to present it at, say, my board meeting or at actual conferences, and they come and they present it sometimes with the business owners. So, you know, you couldn't find something that they're so passionate about, because they did everything from start to finish. What are some of the things that we were interviewed by National Public Radio, because obviously it was done free of charge. You know, such a great story, right? I felt like a Mother Teresa, you know, doing this. But my students were there at the interview, and they spoke because it was their work. So, you know, for the students, they just love this, and it's sort of non-traditional actuarial work. But, you know, people think actuaries are only capable of doing, you know, modeling or whatever, life contingencies type of stuff. No, they're actually very good with some guidance. And maybe not everyone has that capability, but they work in a team. So some are more creative than others, but they work together. I use some business students, but we don't have an entrepreneurship department. But you can also bring in business students or statistics. But actually, in the NPR interview, they asked me, well, why actual students? Wouldn't business students be more inclined to do this kind of work? Think of it, right? I mean, small businesses, risk management. I wasn't I wasn't prepared for that question. I think I answered it quite well. See, I think what people forget as actuaries, we know risk. We know how to model risk. We know how to work with limited information. Sometimes you don't realize that, but that's a skill we have. That doesn't mean to say that skill cannot be transferable to something else. So it's just taking that same skill set and adapting it. Now, I'm not saying other students aren't capable of doing it, but I notice business students, at least the ones I've been working with, are not necessarily very good in modeling. So actuaries are very good at that. But sometimes they may not think as broadly as business students, but it's something they can learn and they can pick up. But some of the small businesses we worked with, we did a small bagel store where we actually built a budget, a cash flow model for them in Excel. The students are very good. They went through the computers of the bagel store, retrieved all the transactions, and built this wonderful cash flow for them, and made them realize that they have over 100 items, but about 10 or 12 of the items are generating about 90% of their profits. They knew it, but they didn't know how, the extent of it. So immediately they simplified their drive-through menu, which was 100 items, things like that. Then there were qualitative things like this was a successful small business, been around for quite a few years, but they always wanted to be like a Panera. And so my students went to visit the store, and of course they're young. I mean, I thought it was pretty good, but they said it's not a cool place to go. That was their immediate reaction. So, these are little things that students bring to the table, and of course, and the owners were engineers actually, older, so they took it to heart because they thought it was a nice place. But anyway, but there were a whole bunch of great ideas that came up. Then we did a microbrewery, which that was my personal favorite, right around campus. Very successful, but something we learned about the microbrewery business, like in this case, the entire success of a microbrewery is in the hands of the brewmaster. And this happens to be a guy, he has all the recipes to make this beer. And he never thought of what happens if something happened to him. So little things like that. They also, there's a law which says that if you went to a brewery, or I guess a microbrewery, and you got intoxicated, and you left, and subsequently had an accident, the brewery is liable. There's a law. I don't know what it is, but it's an interesting thing that they weren't aware of it. Now, what can you do about it? Well, you can just be more proactive, and observe the drinks you're serving and behavior. So the waiters and waitresses could easily do that. So little things. Oh, then the other problem they had was, it's a wonderful beer, wonderful food, but where it's situated is in a real small town. It's Willimantic, and they have a parking lot which is unbelievably small. So they get far more customers wanting to come there, but no place to park. And it's sort of a small town. So people come, they can't park, they leave. So we suggested valet parking, with a lot of free parking lots around. Oh, they love the idea. So it's little things like that. So anyway, so we had this interview. We did this article in Contingencies magazine, presentations. But the latest that has happened is I've been approached by Actex. Actex is, they publish their actuarial books. They approached me to write a book on this subject now. That's when I sort of threw my hands and said, I can write an article, but write a book. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be the editor of the book. And I'm soliciting articles from academicians and practitioners. And I think having a textbook on this subject is probably the first step to put some discipline in this field. And of course, because I'm not writing the book, I can afford to be lavish in all the things I want to be included in the book. And if you look at special expertise, like for example, does anyone know what is the regulatory and legal environment for small businesses? I don't know. But there's a law professor at UConn who teaches business law. And I met him actually. My wife was, he's the spouse of a special ed teacher, and my wife in special ed. And I was chatting with him, I was telling him about his book, and I said, I'm struggling to find someone who knows business law for small businesses. He said, I do it all the time. So he's already booked for one chapter. So anyway, okay, so now the hardest thing was, how do you do something for free to making money? Now, I'm not talking about making money just for the joy of making money. For something to be sustainable, you have to have a revenue stream. And believe it or not, I didn't have the idea. But it actually came from my advisory board, because I had my students present the work. And
you're doing fine.
I'm doing fine. Huh?
Keep going.
Okay, okay. So I had my students present the work, and one of the board members came up to me and said, Jay, this is very interesting what you guys are doing, because we don't ever get down to that level. And he said, have you ever considered doing it for the distribution channel of a major insurance company? And just think about it, right? Insurance companies, they sell their products. I don't know, Gary, whether it's the same way as you guys. They use independent market IMOs. Do you use IMOs?
IMOs, we use IMOs, yes.
Do you have your...
Depends on the product. We sell a lot of different products through a lot of different channels.
Okay.
But
so IMO means...
For independent marketing organization.
Yeah. And at least with this company, they had IMOs were their main source of distribution, but the IMOs is like a wholesaler, and they have underneath them about 60 or 50 or 60 independent agencies. Now, every independent agency is really like a small business.
Mm-hmm.
How many people know exactly what makes them, grow, develop, the failure rate? They have very different risks. So the insurance company doesn't drill down to that level, but we can do that. So and of course, the insurance company will fund it because it's to their vested interest. So to move from something which is free, which I still want to continue to do, to something which can be funded, the secret is to work with a business sector, not individual one-off small businesses, and funded by a parent organization which has a vested interest in the success of the business sector. So it could be a Walgreens, funding all the independent retail Walgreens. I presented this topic a week or so ago, last week actually, at a conference of consulting actuaries, and my co-presenter was someone from Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola distributes their products to a lot of independent sort of small businesses or small channels, and she also sort of echoed the fact that they don't know much about what makes these, like what are best practices. Now, when you do that, you have to do it in a far more rigorous way, because the way we do it with a small business or with a one-off business, we do the work, write the report, and then we walk away. We don't track or measure. So if you're doing it for an entire business sector, you must come up with techniques on how to track and measure. And that's actually very interesting statistics. So, it's fascinating if you just keep, moving it up. So I think this also has a lot of potential.
I have a...
Yes.
I was going to say, on you've got the issue where the entrepreneurs generally don't want to pay for it.
Yes.
But I think you also have the issue that the typical entrepreneur has less risk aversion than maybe they should. And so they may not see risk as being something that they necessarily have to manage. But have you thought about talking to private equity funds?
No. In fact, I mentioned another group to talk to are banks. Mm-hmm. Banks would also have a vested interest, but they give loans to small businesses.
Sure.
And of course, they want the businesses to succeed, because the end result of any ERM kind of analysis is to make sure you don't fail. Now, in that article I wrote, I say for small businesses, not failing is not enough. You also have to combine business strategy with risk management. So they have to not just not fail, but they have to grow and be profitable. It's true with even a large corporation, except for a large corporation, the risk management function focuses mainly on risk. Then you have business strategy and growth, which will be marketing and sales. Here it's one and the same thing. You're right, I mean, the equity firms, I don't even know where this is going to take us. But that's why the book is very important, because I think once we have a book, and that's something we can talk about collaborating too going forward. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted this for all the students in the room. I think it's really fascinating, and Gary and Jay are both very involved in the SOA. Isn't one of the at least one of the themes that you guys talk about is making sure that actuaries are viewed as more than just consulting firms or insurance firms, that risk management in general is applied across many different fields, and so people with an actuarial background, are huge assets in any business and strategic.
Correct. In fact, I think that there's a likelihood that this book is going to be funded by the Society of Actuaries. I've got to go through all the politics. I'm an expert at it, by the way. SOA didn't want to get involved.
You have to get friends with Manaz.
What's that?
Manaz Lalani, do you know him?
No, I spoke to Glenn Myers and Steven Seagal. Well, the problem is this, okay? Actex they wanted to publish the book.
Those are the guys who do the exams
and all that. SOA doesn't want to get involved because Actex is doing the publishing. So I said, I don't care who publishes it. I want the book out, and I want to get some funding because I wanted to pay professors and all that. Not a lot of money, but an inducement to write an article. I thought that'd be great. So I told SOA, I said, okay, fine, you don't want to do this because Actex is doing it. Will you fund it if you were publishing it? And they said, yeah, they'll think about it. So then they had conflict of interest. Well, intellectual property. I don't know what intellectual property is involved. We are writing a book. It's for the whole world. Anyone can use the book and make money out of it. So they use these words. I don't know what it means. I don't think they know what it means.
They have too much risk aversion.
I'm a very persistent guy, so I'm working on this. But this book is going to happen. And the other nice thing is that I had to market it to Towers Watson because obviously this is really not right in their core work. And I have to use sort of similar words that I'm opening up an area for consultants because it's an area that no one has touched yet. And of course I had to develop a way in how you make money out of it. And so I moved to the business sector abroad. So I've got the endorsement of Towers Watson to write this book. So that means my time to do this book. So remember I started off saying that I'm hoping that at the end of this talk you believe and you're convinced that collaborative research can be really beneficial to industry, to benefit really both parties, and you cannot get it from any one entity alone. And I believe it, and I've lived, before Towers Watson and Watson White, I was with Deloitte, so for almost 13 years at least, I've been doing this type of work. My business partners have changed, but the work hasn't changed. But again, if you notice everything I've mentioned, the ideas came from very pragmatic concerns, and it all came from industry. Some things I didn't know what was going to happen, so I had a little bit more of a longer-term perspective. But it's okay, that's what academicians are good for. And you can't have companies or consulting firms devoting long periods of time before you produce something. But universities can. But I think if you're doing collaborative research, especially with the university like the University of Minnesota, don't think it has to be always long-term or just short-term. There's a whole spectrum of projects, so you could do a variety. There could be some things that are immediate. And by the way, I've just showcased these 3 projects. I do other projects as well. Fairly short-term, have to be done within 4-6 weeks. My students are doing it. So it's a variety of projects, but the key thing is that I'm constantly talking to people in industry, particularly my advisory board, to make sure I'm going to find out what they want to do and getting the right students to do it. And I don't think you could do it in one way or the other, just with one group alone. And I also, especially on this ERM, and every time I present this ERM for small businesses, I always tell students, you never think of the actuarial profession. It's a great profession, but you never think of the actuarial profession as a noble profession. When you think of a noble profession, you think of doctors and nurses and maybe teachers. Okay? But I said that things like ERM for small businesses, that's really a noble endeavor. This has global implications because if you think of what you can do to developing countries, small businesses, if you can reduce the failure rate, you can have a rippling effect on the entire economy. And why not actuaries lead the charge? So anyway, this is an example, and of course I've got other things as well. So that's all my thoughts. Yes.
I have a question. Since you're committed to satisfy industry needs, and sometimes in an immediate manner, does that in any way, guide the solution you're seeking?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like I think I mentioned that this was a project. I went for the annual meeting, and I spoke to one company, and this is short, 4 to 6 weeks, which is relatively short. And this company is, I don't know whether it's true in every insurance company, but now because of all the low interest rate environment and stock market volatility, companies are actually investing back again into what I call underwriting revenue. So in short, this company is buying pension liabilities, which is kind of like a life annuity. And they're committing to pay these benefits until the person dies. And obviously, whoever is selling it to them is paying them a lot of money, giving them assets. So that it's a valuation question. How do you value a block of pension liabilities? And obviously, if your estimates are good, better, if your experience is better than what you expected, and better here means people died earlier than expected, you can make money, which is purely what I call underwriting money, because using mortality alone. It's a very interesting project, and this company wants someone to do analysis. So there are 2 levels of the analysis. One is credibility. These pension blocks are not huge. They are obviously big intercompany studies like the RP 2000, for example. That's a huge table, industry table. So do you value this table using an industry table alone, or just their own experience, or some kind of a combination? Now, credibility is not a science, but you can use some intelligent methods, and there's SOA guidance on what to do. So my students are first of all coming up with a credibility formula, but it's actually another part of this question that they want us to do is that you have all this information on these pension liabilities. For example, these blue-collar workers, male, female. I don't know what is in the database, but can you predict mortality? It's almost like predictive modeling using other attributes of pension liabilities. Now, obviously, you don't have a rich data set, but there's a PhD student who's a student of Emil Valdez, who you might know, he's a professor there. She's doing a lot of theoretical work with Emil, who's a very theoretical guy. But they've been exploring this HRS database, this Health and Retirement. It's a huge government database. It's all on retirees. It's a population database, but when you're dealing with annuities, there's no underwriting involved, so the population is not a bad proxy for lots of things. But what's nice about that population database, you can capture patterns about impact of income on longevity and a whole bunch of things, using those factors and applying it to this sort of credibility-weighted table. Is that academically rigorous? Very practical. Certainly the company doesn't have the time or the ability to explore the HRS database and do something like this. We have to do it all within 4 to 6 weeks. So back to your question, I kind of guided our research based on that. The NRSI, the index, much longer time frame. I could do a lot more exploring and to come up with it. RSS was even longer, of course.
So maybe there's sort of consulting work that you do through the center and longer term, more rigorous research. Is that kind of the mix that you have?
Yes, and yet I wouldn't even call this particular example, this pension liabilities, as necessarily pure consulting work. If you switch it and say, if suppose Towers Watson was doing the project, first of all, I don't think they'll do it for the money that the company is paying, but suppose they're doing it and they're willing to do it for maybe a limited amount of money. Well, what's going to happen is that they will devote a certain number of hours for this project. So that will limit some of the exploring they can do. I have 3 graduate students. They can do lots more exploring. But with my guidance, of course. And I might even have some other people in Towers Watson guiding, but not necessarily doing the work. So I still look at this as another level. And we could continue doing work on this after the project's over.
Sure.
Yeah, so
it's a starting point for maybe deeper research.
Yes.
I have a question on, so the center's been around since 2009. How many students have benefited, had experiences there doing projects? Is it like 100 or?
No, less.
Okay.
I would say maybe about half of that. It's increasing though. Now I walk into my class, I already have this whole list of students coming up to me, wanting to work on projects. It's really been a great draw to the faculty,
Great.
To the program really, because there's nothing like working on something real, and they get exposure to companies, of course. So in this particular project on this pension liabilities, the students are going to be meeting with the company and presenting it.
And how do they get selected?
It's my bias selection, of course. Well, yes and no. But well, I usually depends. Like this RSS thing. Believe it or not, I needed students who are very strong in MATLAB.
Sure.
And so I look for those skills. Like the ERM for small businesses, I may look for different qualities. So
It just depends on the project.
Depends on the project. I usually wait until I give my first midterm, and then I sort of weed out, the ones who I think good. But the students are great. I've never been disappointed with any of them.
What are the principal objectives in your ERM model?
For small businesses?
Does it depend on the area, for example? So it's sort of the way I see is sort of a dynamic concepts have to be there. One area maybe, say, engineering area is different to, say, retail area.
Yes.
You were talking about?
I hear you, and I think what I tried to put that when I wrote the paper. Obviously, every small business is different, and you can't just give a general statement. In fact, the sort of a general statement as to, call it a template, as to how you should do it, is actually fairly straightforward. You have to, and it's true even in doing risk management for a large organization. You have to identify the risks, you have to prioritize the risks, you have to quantify the risks, and then you find risk mitigation strategies, and that stays the same. But but with those big hitters, then we fill in the blanks for individual companies. One big difference I tell my students, I kind of, again in the paper I mentioned what I think are similarities and differences. Similarities are just what I described. Differences, I said that when you're working with a small business, you have to focus on not just risk, but business strategy as well. Very important. You can't do one without the other. The second thing I said is that normally when we do ERM for large corporations, we look at the tail risk, and that's the big part of what we do, and we build the economic capital models and everything. Well, for a small business, not that the tail risks are unimportant, but they are what I call reasonably likely risks with severe consequences. That's what you have to focus on. So that is the block you want to identify. And the tail risk may be there, but if you're a small business, what are you going to do if there's, cash flow, or you don't worry about pandemics, that's meaningless for that. I also focus on qualitative and quantitative risk. And many people make the mistake that if something is qualitative and cannot be quantified, then it either doesn't exist or it's not important, and that's really not true. Qualitative risk can be even more important sometimes than quantitative risk, and you don't have to take qualitative risk and quantify them. You don't have to. You make the point, like, doesn't have a Panera type atmosphere. Why do you have to quantify that?
It's not cool.
It's not cool, yes. How do you quantify that?
I think that I'll just agree on that, and also, as a point of view, I believe that's a trap that actuaries fall into.
Yes.
That if you can't measure it, then you can't manage it, so we don't bother. And so we spend a lot of time measuring risks that we can measure and talking about how to manage risks that we can manage. And if somebody brings up something that we don't know how to measure, we change the subject. So, and that's a flaw. That's
I agree.
That's a blind spot that actuaries have almost naturally.
I would disagree a little bit. I would say that when you make a decision to either avoid a risk or not to worry about it, you have, in a sense, quantified it. You have said that it's not worth it.
Yep.
So you may not have very clear objective ways to measure and to quantify, but if you are making decisions about it, implicitly you are valuing it. And so I think there is benefit to trying to quantify, even if it's very subjective, especially within a large organization where there's differences of opinion, to be able to say, oh, wait, you thought this was this order of magnitude? I thought it was more like this order of magnitude. to, at least to have that discussion, even if you can't look at historical results.
No, I don't actually think we're disagreeing. I actually think that what I'm suggesting is that we don't pay it. So the ones we know how to quantify, the ones we're trained how to quantify.
Yeah.
We don't know how to quantify. There's a whole bunch of
So
operational.
you give up. Right.
So
Yeah.
we don't spend a lot of time thinking about
And
it.
that's-
And sometimes
whatever,
aren't
yeah.
those the things that, since you've never thought about it or dealt time, and then that's where it comes back to bite you. I don't
Exactly.
know. I mean,
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you don't have to even talk about risk management. There's this retirement index. No one looked at non-financial factors because you can see how nebulous it is, right? And how do you bring it in? But if you're doing economic projections and coming up with a economic-based retirement index, I mean, that's neat, clean, nice analysis, and you can come up with a nice number and a nice model to come up with. But is it complete? I don't think it is. And that's why I think we brought in the other factor. But now we are in a murky area. How do you actually quantify it? But it's part of the challenge. And I think actuaries are very capable of doing it. Because I think we always work with limited data, and we try to, certainly consultants do it, I know, and I'm sure everyone does it too. So you can do it, but we don't do enough of that, I think.
It's hard to estimate the error. I mean, you can quantify everything. You just not always know what
Right.
is your error. That's the
That's
point.
true, but
How diffuse is your priority?
right.
what did you say,
How
Chris?
diffuse is your priority?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how, you have a model of everything to a
Right.
certain extent every time you make decisions.
Right.
Well-
You can't always quantify exactly how
I
uncertain you are.
have an answer to that. And I think we had to struggle with all these questions when you build more for the risk index. Small businesses was I'd say, much easier. But for the risk index, how do you can almost answer a different question. What do you want your index to accomplish? So let's go to the very end. So first of all, we said we want to capture financial and non-financial factors. The other piece we try to say is that the index has to be consistent. So that means it's not so important that you can measure the error, but at least changes in the index. So if for whatever reason your health measure shows that people are getting unhealthy, the index should move in the right direction. That is probably more important because at the end of the day, I don't care how rigorous you do it. Even the Boston College Index, it's an index. I can tear it to pieces if I dig into all the little pieces that get into it. But it's the direction, and you're consistent, and it's logical, and obviously it's something that can easily be explained. And so I think sometimes it's setting up these axioms, I think, and making sure that whatever you do fulfills them rather than getting right into the details. I want to make sure I've got some underlying theory or some mathematics behind it. I don't know, that's two approaches. But we had to use that for the retirement index.
Jay, you probably well know that the Casualty Actuarial Society, defined ERM, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago.
Yes.
And then they put out an RFP and they said, we like this concept, but we don't think we come up with any good measures of value. And they said, we want people to come in and show us how to measure the value that's contributed by ERM. Have you tracked that?
No, but it's one of the chapters in this upcoming book. but really, I think that's a very, very important question. It's a very important question. How do you measure and track? And actually, it's got analogies to how do you measure and track like some kind of intervention to say improve mortality rather than change your underwriting. So suppose, right? I mean, this only makes sense for a business sector, really. You're working in the business sector and you've done a risk management analysis and you've come up with, I'll call it intervention techniques to improve processes or what have you. Well, you're not going to see the results in failure rates tomorrow. But if you have historical results of what drives failure rate, almost like a generalized linear model, where failure rate is driven by a whole range of things, cash flow, I mean, whatever, all these different things. And now if your intervention techniques hit some of these things or remove these factors, you can at least, if not see the immediate impact of your intervention, you can at least project what it should be. But at least it gives you something to track on an ongoing basis. So I feel, but all I'm saying is, these are words, but to actually do it in a sort of a rigorous way would be a way to quantify it. And we struggle with the same thing. What are the effects of obesity? You're not going to see it right away, but you can project it. That doesn't mean to say that obesity is not going to have a detrimental effect. It can, and so you can do the same kind of a technique, and that's why I'm getting statisticians.
Well, and the nice thing about dealing with small companies is you've got enough volume there that potentially you
Yes.
could have a control group, right? That you could say, let's look at these companies
Right.
that have been helped and these ones who aren't, and,
Yes,
and
yes.
what sort of impact
And
has
in
it had
fact,
as a group over time.
there's another person I've spoken with or worked with, the restaurant industry, which is kind of, everyone thinks of small businesses is opening up your own restaurant. But the restaurant industry is not as scattered as you might think. And there's a guy who's a professor, he's in hospitality, that's his field. And he's an expert on restaurants. And he spoke at the annual meeting with me. And you know who is like the parent above restaurants? I only learned it through him. They have something called the National Restaurant Association. I never knew of that. I knew of NRA, but not the National Restaurant Association. And they are a very powerful group with money, and they have a vested interest that the restaurants in a certain area succeed. And this guy has done exactly what I'm saying is the next level. He's not an actuary. He's a business professor. And he's studied restaurants in different regions, and he's got all these, what causes restaurants to fail, succeed, grow, and it's like some things you don't even imagine. So he was a great speaker to speak with me because he had all this anecdotal information, but he's not an actuary, so he has a lot of difficulty in quantifying and doing the analysis. So one of my actual students is helping him. And we are naturally collaborating because it's risk management, something different and something I'm doing. So if you start thinking more and more, you'll find that there are sectors that actually belong to some kind of a parent organization.
One last question.
Oh,
Am I going?
You.
Yeah, thank you. Can you describe a little bit about your stratified sampling method? Particularly, how is it different from ordinary statistical method? Can it be applied outside the business sector? For example, there's stratified sampling going on in the last few months connected to elections.
yes.
And no one knows what's the, clearly what is going on.
Yeah, I think
Is that possible? Your package, can it be put in there?
The answer is I really don't know. I don't know. I'm focusing on financial modeling. The thing why it may not be so practical
Right.
outside financial modeling is because we talk of getting repeated samples,
Okay.
which is not something statisticians do. The other question people ask me is,
Repeated samples from the same data?
no, from the population.
Population.
Not
Oh.
bootstrapping. It's not bootstrapping.
Oh, it's not bootstrapping.
No. See,
Okay.
it's very different. Now,
Okay.
bootstrapping is what statisticians can do because they only.
But it is very costly though, right? Your method.
No,
No.
not for a
No,
company.
the point is-
Once you got the population, it's
We
okay.
have is what is a database.
Okay. Right.
It's nothing,
Okay.
but it's costly for outside financial modeling.
So it will be costly if you want to use your method in election prediction. maybe.
Yeah, then you have to take
Many-
Gallup polls over and over
Yeah,
again. Of
yeah.
course, you can't.
And time is also limited.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a natural connection, but the statisticians, what's interesting in terms of the research here is that what happens when you combine these samples? What are the things you can, there's a lot of nice theoretical questions that you have all these independent and identically distributed estimates. How do you combine them together? I mean, or sequential, how do you know when to stop, when you've reached a level of accuracy? Because when you apply this, you're not running the full population anymore. You're making your decisions based on this sampling approach. So it raises other questions as well. So there's some theoretical aspects of it, but I don't think it can be applied, I don't think so, to outside financial modeling. I don't think so.
Have you used any other concepts other than in stats in your package? I mean, any?
We did that. We use nothing super sophisticated in terms of how do you remove outliers. When you're drawing these repeated samples, how do you remove outliers? We've got a little bit of that, but not much. It's very, very straightforward, so usually. But there are a few little wrinkles, so I'm not saying it's totally straightforward, but overall it's not super complicated.
So, thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Maybe